Welcome back to our channel. Today we are stepping outside for a very special English lesson. Leave your desk behind and bring only your curiosity with you. Today we are going to talk about learning English while walking outside. This is one of the most powerful lessons you will ever hear about this topic. This is something that can completely change your life. Your daily walk can become your best English teacher. It costs nothing. It requires no special equipment. It is always available to you, in every city, in every country, in every season. Millions of learners already have everything they need, without realizing it yet. Many people think English lessons only happen inside a classroom. They sit down with a book and wait for motivation to arrive. They believe learning must feel serious, heavy, and difficult. They feel tired after a long day and skip their practice completely. They wait for the perfect quiet hour that never actually comes. They believe progress only counts if it happens at a desk. But the truth is different. Some of the best learning happens when you are moving, not sitting still. Walking wakes up your brain and increases the oxygen reaching it. It reduces stress and opens your mind to new words. Many scientists have shown that light movement improves memory and focus. They imagine fluent speakers sitting quietly for years inside perfect classrooms. They imagine expensive courses, private tutors, and long, difficult grammar textbooks. They rarely imagine a simple walk outside their own front door. This narrow imagination quietly blocks many learners from their easiest possible progress. Meanwhile, their daily walk to work or to the market continues unused. That same walk could have carried dozens of new English words instead. The real problem is not a lack of time in your day. The real problem is that people never use the time they already have. As you listen to this video, you will also improve your English. Pay attention to the vocabulary you hear in every lesson. Pay attention to the sentence patterns repeated throughout this video. The more you listen, the stronger your English naturally becomes. This is true even if you do not understand every single word. Some words may quietly repeat several times without you noticing them consciously. And before we begin, if you enjoy learning English through powerful stories and life lessons like this, make sure to subscribe to English Ascent and continue your ascent with us every single day. Lesson 1. Walking gives your brain space to learn new words. One of the biggest secrets about language learning is remarkably simple. Your brain learns best when your body feels relaxed and moving gently. Sitting at a desk for many hours can make you feel mentally stuck. Your mind often grows tired long before your body does. Walking changes your blood flow and wakes up your thinking. It creates open space for new words to enter your mind. Fresh air genuinely seems to carry fresh thoughts along with it. This is why so many great ideas arrive during a walk, not a meeting. Writers, scientists, and thinkers have used walking for centuries to solve problems. Your English learning can use this same simple, natural advantage. Think about how differently your body feels after a long, boring meeting. Now think about how your body feels after a short walk outside. Your shoulders relax, your breathing slows down and deepens naturally. Your thoughts stop racing and start flowing more calmly instead. This calm, steady state is exactly where real learning happens best. Classrooms rarely offer this kind of calm, natural, moving environment for learners. Doctors have long recommended walking for a healthier heart and healthier lungs. Language teachers are only now beginning to recommend it for a healthier memory too. Your legs and your vocabulary, it turns out, might grow stronger together. Imagine a young man named Hamza. Hamza worked at a small shop in his city. Every evening he felt too tired to open a textbook. He tried reading English books after closing the shop each night. His eyes felt heavy, and his mind felt completely empty. The words on the page slowly began to blur together. One evening, Hamza decided to try something completely different. He put in his headphones and walked outside instead of sitting down. He listened to short English lessons while walking around his neighborhood. At first, it felt strange to learn while his body was moving. His feet were busy, but his mind, strangely, felt free. During the first week, He only understood small pieces of each lesson. He did not force himself to understand every single word he heard. By the second week, certain phrases began repeating naturally in his mind. He noticed himself saying small English sentences while closing the shop. After a full month, something had clearly changed inside him. He remembered new words far more easily than he ever had before. His mind felt awake and alert instead of heavy and tired. Hamza kept walking every single evening after that first month. Slowly, his vocabulary grew without any extra effort or stress. He did not need more free time added to his busy day. He only needed a better way to use the time he already had. 6 months later, Hamza could hold a full conversation with a stranger. His customers noticed the clear change in his spoken English. He smiled every single time he remembered exactly where it all started. Hamza's favorite route passed through a small park near his home. He began greeting strangers in English, simply for extra practice. Some people smiled politely. Others looked confused and walked away quickly. Hamza did not feel embarrassed, because nobody around him truly cared. He kept a short mental list of new words he wanted to try. Every walk became a small chance to test one fresh word aloud. Within 3 months, speaking English to strangers felt completely normal to him. He even started teaching his younger brother a few new words each evening. Their shared walks slowly turned into a small, private classroom for both of them. One particular morning, Hamza noticed a tourist asking for directions in English. Without thinking, he answered smoothly, using words he had practiced on his walks. The tourist thanked him and complimented his clear, confident English. Hamza walked home that day, almost floating with quiet pride. He later told his brother that moment felt more rewarding than any test score. Now think carefully about your own daily life and habits. Do you also feel too tired to sit and study at night? Maybe your evening walk is quietly waiting to become your classroom. You do not need a perfect desk to learn English well. You only need your feet, your ears, and your full attention. Your very next walk could become the beginning of real progress. Perhaps you already walk somewhere every single day without truly noticing it. To the shop, to work, to a friend's nearby house. Each of these ordinary walks could quietly become a small English lesson. You do not need to add new time to your busy schedule. You only need to add new intention to time you already spend walking. Tomorrow, before you leave your house, choose one short lesson to listen to. Let your feet carry you forward, while your mind quietly absorbs new words. You do not need to wait for the weekend or a special free afternoon. Even a short 10-minute walk to buy bread can become useful practice. English is patient. It will wait for you exactly as long as you need, but your own progress will not wait for excuses to disappear on its own. Remember this: movement can open the exact door that tiredness usually closes. Lesson 2. Talking to yourself out loud builds real speaking confidence. One of the biggest truths about speaking English is slightly uncomfortable to hear. You cannot become confident by only listening quietly to others. You cannot become fluent by only reading silently inside your own head. Speaking is a physical skill, very similar to walking itself. Your mouth and your brain need real, repeated practice working together. Silence feels safe and comfortable, but silence never builds real confidence. Only your own voice, spoken clearly out loud, can train your speaking muscles. Many learners understand this truth, yet very few actually practice it daily. Think about how a person learns to swim by simply reading about swimming. No matter how many books they read, their body never learns the motion. Speaking English works in exactly the same physical, practical way. Your mouth needs its own kind of repeated physical practice, separate from your mind. Understanding a language and speaking a language are two very different skills. Many learners spend years perfecting the first skill while completely ignoring the second. Then they feel confused when years of study do not produce fluent speech. Imagine two people who both want to speak fluent English. Meet Sarah. Sarah is the first person in our story today. Sarah studies English grammar carefully every single night in her room. She reads long lists of vocabulary words on her phone. She understands almost every sentence she encounters inside her textbook. But the moment someone speaks directly to her, she freezes completely. Her carefully memorized words disappear at the exact moment she needs them. The second person in our story walks every single morning before work. During her walk, she talks to herself quietly in English. She describes her plans for the day out loud as she walks. She practices brand new sentences, testing how they feel in her mouth. She makes small mistakes constantly, and she simply keeps talking anyway. At first, both women appear identical on paper and on tests. Sarah even scores noticeably higher on formal grammar examinations at school. But slowly, their two lives begin moving in very different directions. 1 year later, there is only a small difference between the two women. The second woman can already speak smoothly during real, unplanned conversations. Sarah still freezes whenever someone asks her one simple question. 5 years later, there is now a very large difference between them. The second woman feels confident inside meetings, interviews, and casual conversations. Sarah is still practicing silently at home, still waiting to feel fully ready. She has spent years accumulating knowledge that her mouth never learned to use. The second woman in our story kept a simple, private morning ritual. She stood in front of her mirror before leaving the house each day. She practiced saying one full sentence about her plans out loud. Then she repeated that same sentence pattern throughout her entire walk. Some mornings, she repeated a single sentence 5 or 6 times in a row. She was not performing for anyone. She was simply training her own mouth. Over many months, this small ritual removed her fear of speaking first. She began answering questions at work before her colleagues even finished asking. Sarah, meanwhile, remained the quiet colleague who understood everything but said very little. One day, the second woman's manager suddenly asked her to lead a meeting. She felt a flash of fear, but her walking practice had prepared her voice. She spoke clearly, paused naturally, and finished the meeting with quiet confidence. Her manager later asked where she had learned to speak so smoothly. She simply smiled and said she had been practicing on her morning walks. Now think carefully about learning English in your own daily life. Are you more like Sarah, silent and only reading inside your head? Or are you willing to speak out loud, even completely alone? Your walk is genuinely the safest place in the world to practice. Nobody is watching your mistakes, and nobody is judging your accent. This single fact removes almost every excuse you have ever used. Tomorrow morning, try speaking 3 simple sentences out loud during your walk. Describe your plans, your mood, or simply the weather around you. It will feel strange for the first few mornings, and that is completely normal. Strange feelings usually mean your brain is building a brand new skill. Give yourself permission to sound imperfect, hesitant, and even a little awkward. Nobody becomes fluent by staying silent until they feel perfectly ready. You might feel silly at first, and that feeling is completely expected. Most confident speakers once felt exactly as silly during their very first attempts. The difference is simply that they kept speaking anyway, walk after walk. Silliness fades quickly, but the skill it builds quietly stays with you. Remember this: real confidence is built through your own voice, not silent thoughts. Lesson 3. Describing the world around you turns walking into practice. One of the biggest mistakes English learners consistently make is studying only from books. Books usually teach you words describing a fixed, unchanging, imaginary world. But real life outside your window is always moving and always changing. When you walk outside, the world offers unlimited new practice material for free. A tree, a car, a shop, a stranger, all of it becomes a lesson. You simply have to notice these things and describe them in English. A textbook can only ever show you one single, static picture. The real street outside your home changes its picture every single minute. New people, new weather, new sounds arrive constantly, without you asking for them. This constant change means you will never run out of practice material. Your neighborhood, in a real sense, becomes a textbook that rewrites itself daily. Imagine a student named Ahmed, walking through his familiar old city streets. Ahmed decided one morning to describe everything he saw in simple English. He looked up at the sky and said, "The sky is bright today." He looked at a nearby vendor and said, "The man is selling fresh oranges." He watched some children playing and said, "The children are laughing loudly nearby." At first, his sentences felt extremely short and painfully simple to him. He worried these basic sentences were somehow too easy to matter much. But every single day, he added a few more small details. He described colors, sounds, smells, and feelings, not only plain objects. Within just a few weeks, his simple sentences grew longer and more natural. He noticed himself thinking directly in English during these daily walks. He no longer translated sentences from his first language inside his head. His quiet descriptions slowly became a private conversation with the entire world. His friends later asked him how his English improved so quickly. Ahmed simply told them about his walks, and they seemed surprised. They had assumed he was secretly taking expensive private lessons somewhere. Ahmed eventually turned his descriptions into a private game with simple rules. He gave himself 1 full minute to describe a single scene completely. He described a busy street corner, then a quiet garden, then a crowded market. Some scenes gave him only 5 or 6 simple sentences at first. Other scenes, once he felt more comfortable, gave him 20 or more. He began noticing details he had walked past for years without seeing. A cracked wall, a faded sign, a particular shade of morning light. His descriptions grew richer, not because his vocabulary suddenly grew larger. His attention simply grew sharper, and his sentences naturally followed that sharper attention. Ahmed's descriptions eventually became detailed enough to fill a small private journal. He wrote down his best sentences after returning home from each walk. Reading his old entries later, he noticed his sentences growing steadily more natural. What once felt like a simple exercise slowly became genuine, comfortable self-expression. He later reread his very first entries and smiled at how simple they once were. Simple, he realized, was exactly where every fluent speaker had once begun too. Progress, he learned, rarely looks impressive while it is actually happening. Now think carefully about your own daily walk or commute. What do you usually notice, but almost never actually describe? Try naming the colors, the sounds, and the small actions around you. This simple daily habit trains your brain to think in English automatically. It quietly turns an ordinary street into a full, moving classroom. Start small tomorrow with just 3 simple descriptions during your walk. Notice 1 color, 1 sound, and 1 small action around you. Say each one out loud, slowly, in your own simple English. You will likely be surprised by how much you usually walk past unnoticed. That quiet noticing is the real, hidden beginning of fluency. You do not need fancy vocabulary to begin this simple daily habit. Simple words, used often and out loud, build stronger fluency than rare words. Start with what you already know, and let new words join naturally over time. Remember this: the world around you is always offering you brand new words. Lesson 4. Shadowing native speakers while you walk trains your accent. One of the biggest secrets professional speakers and actors use is called shadowing. Shadowing means listening carefully to a sentence and repeating it immediately after. You copy the speaker's rhythm, their speed, and their natural musical tone. This is very different from simply understanding the meaning behind the words. It trains your mouth to move the exact way native speakers move. Walking outside is the perfect quiet time for this specific kind of practice. Think about how children learn their very first language as babies. They do not study grammar rules before they ever speak a word. They simply listen carefully and then copy the sounds around them. Shadowing brings this same natural, childlike process back into your adult learning. It quietly bypasses the part of your brain that overthinks every single rule. Imagine a young woman named Layla, who dreamed of working abroad someday. Layla understood almost everything she read in written English perfectly, but her spoken accent felt heavy, unclear, and difficult for others to understand. Interviewers often kindly asked her to repeat her complete sentences again. She felt embarrassed each time, and her confidence slowly began to shrink. A close friend eventually suggested she try shadowing during her daily walk. Every single morning, Layla listened to short English audio clips while outside. She paused carefully after each sentence and repeated it clearly out loud. She copied the natural rise and fall inside the speaker's actual voice. At first, her own voice sounded strange to her, almost like acting, but she continued this small practice every single morning without ever stopping. After roughly 2 months, her natural rhythm began to feel much more comfortable. Her pauses started matching the pauses used by confident native speakers. Her very next job interview felt completely different from all her previous ones. The interviewer understood her clearly on the very first attempt, without asking twice. Layla walked home that particular day feeling genuinely proud of her progress. She later admitted the daily walking practice mattered more than any textbook. Layla eventually built a simple system for choosing her shadowing material. She picked short clips from interviews, podcasts, and calm news reports. She avoided clips that felt too fast or too complicated for her level. Instead, she chose voices that spoke clearly and at a comfortable pace. She replayed her favorite 5-second clips 3 or 4 times each morning. Slowly, certain sounds that once felt impossible began feeling completely natural. Her tongue learned new positions the same way her legs learned new distances. She often said walking trained her feet, while shadowing trained her mouth. Both skills, she realized, grew stronger through the exact same quiet repetition. During her actual interview, Layla was asked an unexpected, difficult question. She paused briefly, using the same natural rhythm she had practiced outside. Her calm, clear pause made her sound thoughtful rather than nervous or unprepared. The interviewer later said her spoken English felt remarkably clear and natural. Layla later admitted she still practiced shadowing most mornings, even after landing the job. She said stopping felt risky, like a runner suddenly stopping all training. Skills built slowly, she believed, could fade just as slowly if neglected. Now think carefully about your own personal accent and speaking rhythm. Do you often speak in a flat, hesitant, and uncertain voice? Try repeating short sentences out loud during your very next walk. Copy the natural music of whatever voice you happen to be hearing. Your accent genuinely can change simply through walking and repeating sentences daily. Choose one short audio clip before your next walk begins today. Listen once, then repeat each sentence immediately, matching the speaker's exact rhythm. Do not worry about sounding strange during your very first attempts. Every confident accent you have ever admired once sounded strange to someone too. Shadowing does not require expensive equipment or a special quiet studio room. A simple phone, a pair of headphones, and one ordinary walk are enough. The accent you admire in others was never a gift. It was practice. Remember this: your voice learns rhythm through repetition, never through silent, passive reading. Lesson 5. Every walk can become a real conversation practice. One of the biggest truths about fluency is refreshingly simple and completely honest. Fluency does not come from knowing more and more grammar rules. Fluency comes from actually using English inside real, flowing conversation. Most learners quietly avoid real conversation because it genuinely feels frightening to them. But a walk gives you a wonderfully safe way to practice this exact skill. You can create real, believable conversation, even while you are completely alone outside. A grammar rule can sit quietly in a notebook for years untouched. A real conversation, however, demands an instant, living response from you. Walking lets you practice that instant response, safely, before you truly need it. You are essentially rehearsing a play before the actual, unpredictable performance begins. Imagine two people preparing carefully for the very same important job interview. Meet Omar. Omar is the first person appearing in this particular story. Omar reviews his interview questions silently on his laptop every single night. He reads model answers online and memorizes them almost word for word. The second person in our story also studies the exact same interview questions. But every single morning, he walks and speaks his answers out loud. He imagines the actual interviewer asking each question directly to his face. He answers naturally, pauses briefly, corrects small mistakes, and simply keeps walking forward. At first, both men seem equally well prepared for their upcoming interviews. Omar can even recite his memorized answers perfectly whenever he is alone. But slowly, their real, live performance begins to separate in noticeable ways. 1 month later, there is only a small, but clearly visible difference. The second man answers every question smoothly, without any long, awkward pauses. Omar hesitates constantly and searches desperately for memorized lines that suddenly disappear. 3 months later, there is now a much bigger and more obvious difference. The second man receives a genuinely strong job offer after his interview. Omar slowly realizes his silent memorizing never actually prepared his real, live voice. All those quiet nights of memorization never once touched his actual speaking ability. The second man in our story treated every walk like a real rehearsal. He answered common interview questions differently each single morning on purpose. One morning, he practiced speaking slowly and calmly without any rush. The next morning, he practiced adding small, natural pauses between his ideas. He even practiced recovering gracefully after making a small mistake mid-sentence. This constant, varied practice prepared him for the unpredictable nature of real conversation. Real interviewers rarely ask questions in the exact order you expect. His flexible walking practice matched that same natural unpredictability perfectly. Omar's silent memorization, by contrast, only prepared him for one fixed, perfect script. On the actual day of his interview, the second man felt surprisingly calm. He had already imagined this exact conversation many times during his walks. When the real questions arrived, they felt familiar rather than frightening or sudden. His calm, steady answers left a strong, lasting impression on the interviewers. Months later, the second man mentioned this walking habit during a company training session. Several younger colleagues quietly adopted the same simple practice for their own interviews. He told them the real secret was never the words themselves, but the daily rehearsal. Now think carefully about a conversation you feel nervous about having soon. Maybe it involves an interview, a class presentation, or an important meeting. Try walking outside today and speaking your likely answers out loud. Imagine the real person clearly and respond as if they are present. This single simple habit prepares your actual voice, not only your memory. Even 5 minutes of this practice before a real event genuinely helps. Your voice remembers what your silent mind alone could never fully prepare. Try it once before your very next important conversation, and notice the difference. Real conversations rarely follow the script you originally imagined in your head. That unpredictability is exactly why walking rehearsal matters so much for you. It prepares your voice for the moment, not for one fixed, memorized answer. Remember this: real conversation practice always happens through your own spoken voice. Lesson 6. Asking yourself questions in English sharpens your thinking. One of the biggest habits confident English speakers consistently share is self-questioning. They do not simply wait passively for someone else to start talking. They actively ask themselves questions and practice forming clear, complete answers. This particular habit trains your brain to react quickly and naturally in English. Walking gives you quiet, uninterrupted space to build this exact habit every day. Most people only ever answer questions when someone else asks them first. Confident speakers practice answering questions long before anyone actually asks. This quiet daily habit separates naturally hesitant speakers from naturally confident ones. It trains a kind of readiness that classrooms rarely ever teach directly. This habit sounds small, yet its effect compounds significantly over many months. A single honest question each morning slowly reshapes how your brain reacts. Instead of freezing under pressure, your mind learns to respond calmly instead. Imagine a student named Farah, preparing carefully for her university exams abroad. Farah often felt frustratingly slow when answering questions in spoken English. Her thoughts always moved quickly, but her English speech moved noticeably slowly behind them. During her evening walks, she gradually began a simple new daily habit. She asked herself one honest question at the very start of each walk. What did I learn today? What am I genuinely grateful for? What would I change about my day if I could? She answered slowly out loud, patiently correcting her own small mistakes. Some days her answers stayed short and used only simple sentences. Other days, she spoke for several full minutes without stopping even once. Over time, her natural thinking speed inside English began steadily increasing. She no longer needed long, awkward pauses to form one complete sentence. Her eventual exam interview eventually felt like just another ordinary evening walk. She answered every single question with calm, natural, unforced confidence. Her interviewer later commented on how relaxed and prepared she seemed. Farah kept her questions simple during the very first few weeks of practice. She avoided complicated topics and focused only on her ordinary daily routine. This simplicity let her focus entirely on speed rather than difficult vocabulary. Only later did she gradually introduce harder, more abstract questions into her walks. Farah later added a small variation to her question and answer walking habit. She began imagining a stranger asking her the question instead of herself. This small shift made her answers feel less rehearsed and more spontaneous. She practiced starting her answers in different ways each single morning. Sometimes she began with, "I believe," other times with, "in my opinion." This variety prepared her for questions that did not match her expectations exactly. Her university interviewer later asked a question she had never specifically practiced. Farah answered calmly anyway, because her thinking speed, not her memory, carried her through. Farah's habit eventually spread into other parts of her daily life too. She began asking herself quick questions before phone calls and casual conversations. Each small rehearsal made the real moment feel slightly less intimidating than before. Her confidence grew, not from talent, but from this simple, repeated habit. Now think carefully about your own current thinking speed in English. Do you need long, uncomfortable pauses before every single sentence you speak? Try asking yourself one simple, honest question on your very next walk. Answer out loud, slowly at first, and gradually build your natural speed. Your mind genuinely becomes faster the more you practice this daily habit. Pick one honest question right now, before your very next walk begins. Carry that single question with you and answer it slowly outside. Notice how your answer changes the second or third time you try it. This habit costs nothing except a few honest minutes during your normal walk, yet it quietly trains a skill many learners spend years trying to buy. Confidence, it turns out, is far cheaper and closer than most people assume. Remember this: confident, quick thinking in English is trained, never naturally given for free. Lesson 7. Small daily walks build big fluency over time. One of the biggest mistakes learners consistently make is chasing big results too quickly. They study intensely for one single week, then quit completely from sheer tiredness. Real fluency is never built through one single dramatic, exhausting effort. Real fluency grows slowly and quietly, the same way a river carves a canyon. Big, dramatic effort feels exciting for exactly one single week at most. Small, quiet effort feels boring, yet it quietly continues for years afterward. Only one of these two approaches actually survives long enough to succeed. Canyons are never carved by one dramatic flood in a single afternoon. Most learners secretly wish fluency arrived after one single perfect month of effort. Reality rarely rewards this wish, no matter how badly someone wants it granted. Only quiet, repeated effort spread across many ordinary days truly changes outcomes. Think carefully about a river flowing gently over solid, unmoving rock. On its very first day, the river visibly changes absolutely nothing at all. A person watching for only one day would call the river completely useless. But the river continues flowing patiently, every single day, without ever stopping. After many years, that same soft water carves surprisingly deep, wide canyons. The solid rock never truly stood a real chance against such quiet patience. A man named Zane understood this simple truth about rivers and solid rock. Zane walked for only 15 quiet minutes every single morning, practicing his English. He never once tried to study intensely for hours at a single time. Some mornings he felt genuinely bored, and his progress felt completely invisible to him. But exactly like the patient river, Zane continued walking every single morning anyway. After one full year, his co-workers suddenly noticed a very clear change in him. His English had grown deep and strong, exactly like a canyon. Nobody around him ever saw the daily 15 minutes that quietly built his fluency. They only saw the finished result, not the small, invisible daily effort behind it. Zane never once measured his progress by checking it every single day. Instead, he compared himself only once every few months, like checking a canyon. He kept a small notebook and wrote one new word after each walk. He rarely reviewed the notebook, yet simply writing helped the words stick. After 1 year, the notebook held hundreds of small, quietly collected words. Zane said the 15 minutes never felt like a heavy daily obligation. It felt more like a short, pleasant habit, similar to drinking morning tea. That small, comfortable feeling, he believed, was the real secret to lasting consistency. Big goals rarely fail from lack of effort. They fail from lack of comfort. After 18 months, Zane's manager asked him to help train new employees. Zane explained instructions clearly in English, without needing extra time to think. His quiet daily walks had gradually built a fluency his colleagues simply assumed was natural. Nobody guessed it had started with only 15 minutes each morning. Zane's own father once asked him why he bothered with such short walks. Zane simply replied that small, repeated habits eventually outperform occasional, dramatic bursts. His father did not fully understand at first, but he later saw the results himself. Now think carefully about your own personal expectations for learning English. Are you hoping for one dramatic breakthrough moment instead of steady daily practice? Small, consistent daily walks will always outperform occasional, intense study sessions eventually. Choose the quiet, patient river over the impatient, quickly tired sprinter. 15 minutes tomorrow morning is genuinely enough to begin this river. Do not wait for a longer, more perfect hour that never arrives. Small, boring, repeated effort is quietly more powerful than it ever looks. Do not judge tomorrow's walk by how much progress you can immediately feel. Rivers do not feel their own canyons forming beneath their gentle, steady current. Trust the process, even on the mornings when nothing feels different at all. Remember this: consistency, not short bursts of intensity, is what builds true fluency. Lesson 8. Your walk can become the moment your English truly transforms. One of the biggest realizations learners eventually reach feels deeply personal and quiet. Your walk is not merely physical exercise for your tired body. Your walk can become the exact moment everything genuinely changes for you. It is private, it is completely free, and it belongs entirely to you. Nobody else ever decides how you use these quiet minutes outside. Many learners spend years searching for the perfect course or the perfect teacher. The real answer was often waiting quietly outside their own front door. Your walk has been available this entire time, patiently waiting for you. It never once demanded a fee, a schedule, or a perfect classroom. Imagine a woman named Nadia, who once felt completely hopeless about English. Nadia had already tried classes, expensive apps, and private tutors before this. Nothing ever seemed to stick permanently inside her tired, endlessly busy mind. One particular day, tired and frustrated, Nadia simply went outside for a walk. She carried no lesson plan and held no clear expectation that day. She noticed a small bird and quietly said the word out loud. She noticed the gentle wind and described it simply in English. That small, completely ordinary walk became the true beginning of her fluency. She returned the very next day, and then again the day after. Every single walk quietly added one more small brick to her progress. Months later, Nadia slowly realized something had completely changed inside her. She was thinking, dreaming, and even joking naturally and easily in English. It never happened inside a classroom or during a formal, stressful exam. It happened on ordinary streets, during ordinary, completely unplanned daily walks outside. She later told her sister that the walks felt more like therapy than study. Nadia later realized her walks had quietly replaced her old, stressful study sessions completely. She no longer opened grammar books filled with confusing rules and exceptions. Instead, she opened her front door and simply started walking and speaking. Her progress felt slower some weeks, and surprisingly faster during other weeks. She stopped comparing her walking pace to anyone else's language learning journey. She judged her progress only by comparing herself to who she used to be. 1 year after her very first walk, Nadia recorded a short video message. In the video, she spoke fluently about her entire journey, completely in English. She said the hardest part was never the language itself. The hardest part was always the very first step outside. Nadia eventually began inviting a nervous younger cousin to join her walks. She taught her cousin the very same simple habit that once changed her own life. Watching someone else begin the same quiet journey felt deeply meaningful to Nadia. When she realized her transformation had quietly created room for someone else's too. Now think carefully about your very next walk after this video ends today. It could remain just simple exercise, or it could become real transformation. The choice belongs entirely to you, and to absolutely nobody else at all. Your feet are already moving forward. Now give your mind the same direction. This single choice costs you absolutely nothing extra beyond what you already do. It only asks for your attention, your voice, and your willingness. Everything else you need, you were already carrying inside you the whole time. Your story does not need to look exactly like Nadia's story to matter. Your walk, your voice, and your pace are entirely your own to keep. What matters most is simply that you begin, today, in your own way. Remember this: transformation often begins quietly, inside the most ordinary moments of your day. You are not someone who only studies English inside a small classroom. You are someone who now carries English with you everywhere you happen to walk. You are not waiting for the perfect course or the perfect teacher anymore. You are someone who turns ordinary streets into daily English lessons. Start today. Start now. Start where you are. Every single person you have met throughout this lesson started exactly where you now stand. Hamza was simply tired after long days at his small shop. Sarah was simply silent, trapped comfortably inside her own careful memorization. Layla was simply embarrassed by the sound of her own accent. Omar was simply nervous about one important upcoming job interview. Farah was simply slow to answer one single honest question. Zain was simply patient, walking quietly one ordinary morning at a time. Nadia was simply hopeless, until one completely ordinary walk changed absolutely everything for her. None of these people ever needed a perfect classroom or an expensive formal course. They only needed their own feet, their own voice, and real willingness to begin. Every one of them once doubted whether real change was truly possible. Every one of them once felt too tired, too nervous, or too hopeless to begin. And yet, one ordinary walk quietly became the turning point for each of them. The person you want to become is waiting for your decision. That person is not hiding far away in some distant, uncertain future. That person is only one single walk away from who you are today. Put on your shoes quietly. Step outside your own front door. Open your mouth and simply speak without any fear. Let your very first English sentence be spoken under the open sky. Start today. Start now. Start where you are. Thank you so much for spending this valuable time with me today. I hope today's lesson gives you a new way to see your daily walk. If this video genuinely helped you, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to English Ascent for a new English lesson every single morning. Leave a comment below with one new word or sentence you learned today. I would love to read every single one. Keep learning, keep growing, keep ascending. I will see you in the next lesson on English Ascent.